John Roos is the former U.S. ambassador to Japan, and he joins me now from California. I thank you to be in here to give us some insights into this. You know, the three arrows, I recall visiting Japan, and we were doing stories on Abenomics when I was there, when he was in power, and it was always about that third arrow. And yet, if we look at it in 2022, what is that economic legacy as far as you're concerned?
Well, first of all, Paula, thank you for having me. It's a very sad day. Prime Minister Abe was a titan, an incredible leader, and our hearts go out to his family as well as to the people of Japan. I think Abenomics is a very important legacy of the Prime Minister. As you just heard, there was some mixed results, but I will tell you this. I was the ambassador when Prime Minister Abe came into power. And when he presented his three-prong, or three-arrow, as he used to say, economic plan, which included monetary policy, fiscal policy, and regulatory reform, he provided a shot in the arm and a stability to Japan's economy, which had been suffering terribly up until that time. So I think that while people can look back and say, parts of the plan worked and parts of the plan didn't work, I think the fact that it provided this stability and impetus to move forward, as well as putting Japan on the international stage in a much stronger way, is an important part of his legacy.
It certainly was a departure, and it was a different way of thinking that even many Japanese came to think of their economy. I want to point to two things, though. Part of the reason, of course, has always been the aging population in Japan. He was, as we just heard in that report, he was so proud of working women's participation up in terms of, percentages. He said 2 million more women participating in the Japanese economy. He was very, very proud of that accomplishment. And yet, culturally, did he really manage to make a dent in that? Because as you and I both know, the Japanese culture has to go a long way in having women participate equally in the economy.
I think the fact that he introduced the concept of womenomics into the dialogue of Japan, and as you said, with the aging and declining population, it became clear and is clear that it's incredibly important to capitalize on the talents of women in Japanese society. Now, there's a long ways to go, and there was a long ways to go when he introduced the concept. But I think that he accomplished a great deal in the psyche of the Japanese people to begin to recognize that women play an incredibly important role in all economies in the world. And I think that that is part of Prime Minister Abe's legacy, that he introduced the concept of womenomics. And while things are just beginning to take hold, I would say, I think that he accomplished a great deal in that regard.
In terms of Japan's economic security, I'm just wondering what his impact may be in a broader sense. I mean, certainly what he tried with the economy, we just said it was mixed results. And yet, the task ahead of him came as no surprise to anyone when you looked at that issue of deflation that persisted for so long. Do you think there are any lessons learned here, especially when we look at the global challenges ahead?
Well, let me just add one thing to what I previously said. Not only did he deal with the issues of the Japanese economy, but he recognized the regional and international issues that needed to be dealt with. And specifically in terms of economic growth, the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which he was a big supporter of free trade. And when the United States bowed out, quite frankly, to my chagrin, he stepped into that void and created the platform for free trade in the Asia-Pacific region that exists to this day. And again, that is another part of his legacy that I think people will look back on as an important success.
And that is such a good point that you make, because obviously he was so disappointed that a former President Trump did not see it his way in terms of that Trans-Pacific partnership. He forged ahead nonetheless. And before I let you go there, though, do you think that in the Japanese sense that they will see this as a watershed moment for their economy in terms of what he was able to do?
Yes, I do. I think that the foundation that Prime Minister Abe laid was incredibly important. And I do think the Japanese people will look back as this being a very, very important part of his legacy.
Ambassador John Roos, we thank you for weighing in here. And I do note, I can see certainly that you send your condolences to all the Japanese people on what has been an absolutely shocking few hours for so many. Thank you again.
Thank you for having me. My heart goes out to the people of Japan at this particular sad moment in time.
And